November 23, 1944. Great Falls, Montana. The P-63 King Cobra banked through low clouds, its engine noise swallowed by the gray afternoon sky. In the cockpit, Hazel Ying Lee adjusted her grip on the control stick and checked her instruments one more time. She was ferrying the fighter to another base, a routine delivery run, the kind she had flown dozens of times before. But somewhere in that overcast Montana airspace, another aircraft was turning toward the same vector. She did not see it, and in the seconds that followed, the war she had survived in the air would claim her on American soil. Hazel Ying Lee was 28 years old when she died. She had logged hundreds of hours flying pursuit planes, P-51 Mustangs, P-63 King Cobras, twin-engine bombers, across the continental United States as a member of the Women Airforce Service Pilots. She was one of only 2 Chinese-American women in the entire WASP program, and one of the first Asian-American women to fly military aircraft for the United States. Her service took place during a war in which her own country doubted whether people who looked like her could be trusted, let alone entrusted with high-performance fighter planes. She proved them wrong with every flight, and yet, for decades after her death, her name appeared in no major history books. No monument marked her sacrifice. Her story, like the stories of so many women who served in roles the military refused to fully acknowledge, drifted into silence. This is that story. Hazel Ying Lee was born in Portland, Oregon, in 1912, the daughter of Chinese immigrants who had settled in the city's small but tightly knit Chinatown. Hazel grew up American in a country that did not always see her that way. The Chinese Exclusion Act was still in force. Signs in shop windows sometimes read, "No Chinese." But the Lee family persisted. They valued education, hard work, and ambition. Hazel absorbed all 3. She was not a rebel in the obvious sense, but she was restless. She wanted more than the narrow paths laid out for Chinese-American women in the 1930s. Domestic service, factory work, maybe a secretarial job if you were lucky. In 1932, at the age of 20, she saw a barnstorming air show at Swan Island Airport. She watched them loop and dive against the blue Oregon sky, and something inside her shifted. She wanted to fly. Flying lessons were expensive. Hazel worked as an elevator operator and saved every dollar she could. By 1933, she had enough to pay for her first lesson. But Hazel was a quick study. She learned to read the instruments, to feel the plane respond to her touch on the stick, to recover from stalls and spins without panic. Within a year, she had earned her private pilot's license. She was 21 years old. For a while, she tried to make a living in aviation. She even traveled to China in 1933, hoping to find work with the Chinese Air Force as tensions with Japan escalated. It was a bold move, but the opportunity never materialized. She returned to the United States, still determined, still flying. By the time the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Hazel Ying Lee had logged more than 200 flight hours. That experience would soon matter more than she knew. In 1942, the United States military faced a pilot shortage. Thousands of male pilots were being sent overseas to fight in Europe and the Pacific, and the domestic need for ferry pilots, aviators who could deliver new planes from factories to training bases and embarkation points, was growing desperate. A civilian pilot named Jacqueline Cochran proposed a solution. Recruit experienced women pilots to ferry aircraft within the United States, freeing up male pilots for combat duty. The military agreed, reluctantly. By the summer of 1943, the Women Airforce Service Pilots program was formally established. It was not an official military branch. WASPs wore uniforms, but they were classified as civil service employees. Hazel Ying Lee applied to the WASP program in early 1943. She passed the rigorous physical exams, the flight tests, and the interviews. In May 1943, she reported to Avenger Field in Sweetwater, Texas, for training. She was assigned to Class 43 W4. Out of more than 25,000 women who applied to the WASP program during the war, only 1,830 were accepted. Of those, Hazel was one of 2 Chinese-American women. The other was Maggie G., a fellow Californian who would become a close friend. Hazel thrived. She was quiet, focused, and unshakably competent. She did not complain. She did not boast. She simply flew. She graduated in November 1943 and received her Silver WASP wings. Her first assignment was to the 6th Ferrying Group at Long Beach Army Air Base in California. Her job: deliver pursuit planes, fighters, from factories to military bases across the country. These were not trainer planes. These were P-51 Mustangs, P-47 Thunderbolts, P-63 King Cobras, single-seat, high-performance aircraft designed for combat. They were fast, powerful, and unforgiving. A moment's inattention could be fatal. Hazel flew them all. The work was grueling. Ferry pilots might fly 3 or 4 missions a week, crisscrossing the country in all weather conditions. Radio communication was limited. If the weather turned bad, they had to make judgment calls, land early, divert to another field, or push through. There were no co-pilots, no flight attendants, no safety nets, just the pilot, the plane, and the sky. Hazel flew in all seasons. She flew through thunderstorms over the Rockies, through dust storms in the Southwest, through winter snow squalls over the Great Plains. She became known among her fellow WASPs for her calm under pressure, her precision in handling difficult aircraft, and her refusal to be rattled by mechanical problems or bad weather. But the work came with a cost that had nothing to do with flight hours. Hazel Ying Lee was a Chinese-American woman in a country at war with Japan, and not everyone could tell the difference, or cared to try. On more than one occasion, when she landed at a remote airfield in the Midwest or the South, ground crews refused to believe she was an American pilot. They assumed she was Japanese. They demanded to see her identification. They questioned her right to be in the cockpit of a United States military aircraft. Some were hostile. Some were merely confused. All of it was exhausting. Once, after landing a P-51 at a small base in the Midwest, she climbed out of the cockpit and was immediately surrounded by armed guards. They did not ask her name. They asked where she was from. She showed them her WASP identification, her ferry orders, her flight log. They were not convinced. It took the intervention of a base commander to confirm that she was, in fact, an American ferry pilot doing her job. The guard stepped back. No apology was offered. She did not file a complaint. She did not write an angry letter. She simply got back in the cockpit and flew her next mission. That was how she survived, by being so undeniably good at her job that even prejudice had to make room for competence. One mission stands out. In the spring of 1944, Hazel was ferrying a P-63 King Cobra from the Bell Aircraft Factory in Niagara Falls, New York, to Great Falls, Montana. Somewhere over Kansas, the engine began to lose power. She scanned the horizon for an airfield, but there was nothing, just flat farmland stretching to the edge of the world. She had minutes, maybe less, to decide. Try to nurse the plane to the nearest base, or put it down in a field and risk a crash landing. She chose the field. She lined up on a long stretch of open ground, cut the engine to reduce the fire risk, and brought the plane in low and steady. The wheels touched down hard, but the plane did not flip. It did not burn. Hazel climbed out, bruised but uninjured, and surveyed the damage. She had saved the airframe and walked away. No drama, just the facts. That emergency landing earned her quiet respect among her fellow ferry pilots, but it never made the papers. The war was full of such moments, small acts of skill and courage that never became headlines because the people performing them were women, or non-white, or simply not considered important enough to remember. Another story less documented but part of the oral history passed down among WASP veterans, involved a winter mission in early 1944. Hazel was part of a two-plane ferry flight delivering P-51s to a base in Montana. The other pilot, a young woman from Texas, encountered mechanical trouble over Wyoming and was forced to land on a frozen lake. She was stranded. Hazel, flying slightly ahead, realized her wingman was missing. She circled back, spotted the downed plane on the ice, and made a decision. She landed her own P-51 on the same frozen lake, a dangerous maneuver, given the ice conditions and the lack of a prepared surface. She taxied close to the stranded plane, helped the other pilot gather her gear, and flew her out. The two women squeezed into the single-seat P-51 cockpit, one sitting on the other's lap, and Hazel took off from the ice. They made it back to base without further incident. The military did not officially acknowledge the rescue. There were no commendations, no newspaper stories. But among the WASPs, the story circulated as an example of what they did for each other, how they took care of their own in a program that offered them no safety net, no recognition, and no guarantees. She thought she had survived the dangerous part. By the fall of 1944, Hazel had flown more than 700 hours as a ferry pilot. She had logged missions in nearly every type of aircraft the Army Air Forces used: fighters, bombers, trainers. She had flown in weather that grounded less experienced pilots. She had walked away from one crash landing and helped rescue another pilot from certain death in the Wyoming wilderness. She was 28 years old, and she had earned a reputation as one of the most reliable ferry pilots in the program. She was looking forward to the end of the war, to a time when she could fly without constant scrutiny, without the weight of proving herself every single day. November 23, 1944. Great Falls, Montana. Clear skies at dawn, but clouds moving in by afternoon. Hazel Ying Lee was assigned to ferry a P-63 King Cobra from Great Falls Army Air Base to another base farther west. It was a routine mission, the kind she had flown 100 times before. She conducted her pre-flight inspection, checked the weather briefing, and climbed into the cockpit. The engine started smoothly. She taxied to the runway, received clearance, and took off into the overcast Montana afternoon. Somewhere in the air above Great Falls, another pilot was flying a different aircraft on a different mission. Accounts differ on the exact details: who saw whom, who had the right of way, whether there was radio communication. What is certain is that the two planes collided in midair. The impact was catastrophic. Both aircraft spun toward the ground. Hazel's P-63 was severely damaged, but it did not disintegrate. She fought to regain control, to keep the plane level, to find a place to land. She managed to bring the crippled King Cobra down in a rough field near the base. The landing was hard. The plane crumpled. Rescue crews reached her within minutes, but the injuries were too severe. She was taken to the base hospital. She died 2 days later, on November 25, 1944, from internal injuries sustained in the crash. The other pilot survived. Hazel Ying Lee's body was sent home to Portland, Oregon. Her family paid for the funeral. The military did not. The Women Airforce Service Pilots were still classified as civil service employees, not military personnel. Hazel's family held a private service. She was buried in a cemetery overlooking the city where she had grown up, where she had first dreamed of flying. In December 1944, just weeks after Hazel's death, the United States Congress voted to disband the WASP program. The war was winding down, and male pilots were returning from overseas. The women were no longer needed. The program was terminated. The WASPs were sent home. They received no veterans' benefits, no official recognition, no public acknowledgement of their service. For 30 years, the story of the Women Airforce Service Pilots was largely forgotten. Hazel Ying Lee's story was even more deeply buried. She was a woman. She was Chinese American, and she had died in a training accident rather than in combat. In the decades after the war, when historians began to write about the WASP program, her name appeared in only the most detailed accounts. No major newspaper obituary marked her passing. No monument was erected in her honor. Her family kept her memory alive, but beyond Portland's Chinese American community, few knew who she had been or what she had done. It was not until 1977 that the United States Congress finally granted the WASP's veteran status. She had been gone for more than 30 years. In 2010, the surviving WASPs were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the highest civilian honors in the United States. Hazel's family accepted the medal on her behalf. By then, she had been dead for 66 years. The WASP program was disbanded because it was politically expedient to disband it. Hazel Ying Lee's story did not fit that narrative. She was Chinese American in a country that had interned Japanese Americans and passed laws excluding Chinese immigrants. She was quiet, competent, and uninterested in self-promotion. She did not demand recognition. She simply did the work, and when the work killed her, she was buried and forgotten. But the fact that she was forgotten does not mean her service was less real. Between 1943 and 1944, Hazel Ying Lee flew some of the most advanced fighter planes in the United States military. She ferried them across thousands of miles of American airspace, through storms and mechanical failures, through a culture that doubted her right to be there. She survived one crash landing, helped rescue another pilot, and kept flying until the day a mid-air collision took her life. She did all of this without official military status, without veteran benefits, without the promise that anyone would remember her name. She did it because she believed in the work. She did it because she was good at it. And she did it because, in her quiet, determined way, she refused to accept the limitations that others tried to place on her. Her leather flight gloves, the ones she wore on every mission, were returned to her family after her death. They were worn smooth at the fingertips, stained with oil and sweat, creased from hundreds of hours gripping a control stick. Her mother kept them in a drawer for years, unable to throw them away. They were all that remained of a daughter who had flown farther and faster than anyone in the family had ever imagined possible. Hazel Ying Lee was 28 years old when she died. She had flown more than 700 hours in some of the most dangerous aircraft of her time. She had broken barriers of gender and race in a service that did not officially recognize her as a soldier. She had saved lives, delivered planes, and proven herself in a role that most people did not believe a woman, let alone a Chinese American woman, could perform. And for more than 30 years, almost no one knew her name. How many others like her flew into history and vanished?